Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're going way back in the 80s and checking out, well, Double Dragon.
Oh yeah, Double Dragon.
Yeah. Now this wasn't just another beat 'em up.
Right.
This was like a phenomenon. I mean, we're talking sequels, spin-offs, we're talking cartoon, even a movie.
Yeah, it really did leave a mark, that's for sure.
Oh yeah. You know, it's interesting because the Double Dragon that we all know and, love today, it went through a lot of changes. Especially when it made the jump from the arcade to home consoles.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it definitely evolved over time, you know?
Oh, yeah, you're talking about that NES version, right?
Yeah.
The one where, like, you had to take turns, like, you couldn't play together at the same time?
Yeah, exactly.
I remember being so bummed out when I first realized that it was like a huge step backwards.
Oh yeah, imagine the disappointment back then, especially because that co-op play, that was such a groundbreaking thing in the original arcade. But what's so fascinating is that one seemingly simple change that actually had this ripple effect on the whole story.
Wait, what do you mean?
Well, because the NES could only handle one player character on screen at a time.
Right.
The developers had to make a choice.
Yeah.
And instead of just having, Billy go solo, they decided to turn his own twin brother, Jimmy, into the final boss.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. Your own brother becomes the leader of the Black Warriors.
That's rough. That's talk about some family drama.
Right.
Wow. I never realized there was that big of a difference between the arcade version and the NES version. It's like they're two completely different games.
Well, in a way they are. And, it shows how adaptable that whole Double Dragon concept was. It wasn't just some, static thing.
Right.
It evolved. It took on these new forms, sometimes for the better, sometimes, well, let's just say not every version was a masterpiece.
Yeah, I've heard whispers about some of those ports. Like the Commodore 64 version, right?
Oh, yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
The infamous C64 port. Legendary for all the wrong reasons, let's just say it. It didn't quite reach the same level as the arcade original. But even with those flaws, the fact that they ported Double Dragon to so many platforms,
right.
It just shows how popular it was.
Absolutely.
They wanted to get it in the hands of every gamer, no matter what system they were playing on.
Yeah. It's amazing to think like how much the gaming landscape has changed since then, right?
Totally.
Back then you had arcades, you had home consoles, and that was pretty much it.
Right.
It was like a simpler time.
Yeah.
For gaming,
Yeah, definitely. But even in that simpler time, Double Dragon, it still stood out.
Yeah.
It wasn't just another brawler. It had that cinematic feel with the cutscenes, the story. Maybe simple, but it hooked you. It felt like you were part of something bigger, something, I don't know, epic.
Yeah, it really did like capture that spirit of those 80s action movies, like the lone heroes fighting through hordes of enemies to rescue the damsel in distress.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about how that classic formula resonated with players. It was this power fantasy for sure.
Yeah.
But there was also something relatable about the characters and their struggles. Even with all the martial arts, the over-the-top action, there was this heart to it, this sense of brotherhood.
Yeah.
And I think that really resonated with people.
Oh yeah. And that sense of brotherhood, that is at the core of Double Dragon's success, I think. It's not just about beating up bad guys. It's about the bond between these two brothers fighting side by side against, impossible odds.
Totally. And it's that bond that would be tested, twisted, redefined as the franchise kind of evolved and branched out into those different mediums.
I mean, like the cartoon and the live action movie.
Yeah.
Now those are a whole other story.
They are. But before we jump into those adaptations, I think it's important to understand what really made those original Double Dragon games so groundbreaking. What were those key elements that set it apart and paved the way for the beat-em-up genre as we know it?
That's a great question. And it's one that we're going to explore in more detail as we continue our deep dive into the world of, well, Double Dragon.
When we talk about Double Dragon's impact,
Yep.
we got to start with the gameplay itself.
Right.
It wasn't just walking left to right and punching whatever got in your way.
Oh, yeah.
There was strategy involved.
Yeah, you're right. It wasn't just button mashing.
Right.
You had to learn enemy patterns.
Yeah.
You had to time your attacks.
Yeah.
And master those special moves.
Exactly. And the variety of moves was impressive. I mean, you had punches and kicks,
Right.
silbos, knee strikes.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, the iconic hair pull.
Oh, come on. That's classic.
Yeah, that move became synonymous with Double Dragon.
Oh, yeah. It's funny how certain moves just become so iconic, right?
Totally.
You see a character grab someone's hair and knee them in the face, and you just instantly think Double Dragon.
Yeah, it just speaks to the game's impact
Right.
on pop culture, but
Yeah.
Even beyond the individual moves.
Yeah.
What really set Double Dragon apart was the depth of that combat system.
Oh, yeah.
You could chain attacks together,
Right.
Create combos, and you could even use weapons that you picked up from enemies.
Oh, yeah.
So I was it added this layer of complexity.
It did.
That kept players coming back for more.
Oh, for sure. And let's not forget about the 2-player co-op in the arcade version.
Yes.
Oh, that was revolutionary at the time.
Oh, absolutely.
Suddenly you could team up with a friend and take on the Black Warriors together.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a single-player experience anymore. It was a shared adventure.
Totally. And that cooperative element
Right.
added a whole new dimension to the gameplay.
It did.
You had to coordinate your attacks.
Yep.
Cover each other's backs.
Right.
Strategize as a team.
Right.
It wasn't just individual skill anymore. It was about teamwork.
Yeah.
And communication.
Which makes it even more weird that they got rid of co-op in the NES version.
I know.
It's like they took a step forward and then 2 steps back.
I know. Well, like we were talking about earlier, the technological limitations.
Right.
They played a role, but
Sure.
but it is interesting to think about how that decision impacted or the whole experience.
Yeah.
On one hand, it forced players to focus on that single player campaign.
Right.
Which, led to that really dramatic twist with
Right.
Jimmy becoming the villain.
Right.
But then on the other hand, it took away that social element
Yeah.
that was such a big part of the arcade game's appeal.
It's like losing a key ingredient in a recipe.
Yeah.
It might still taste good, but it's not quite the same.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Thanks.
Yeah, and it just speaks to that balance that developers have to find when they're adapting a game for a new platform.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to make sacrifices, and it's all about trying to find the best compromise.
Absolutely. And speaking of compromises, let's talk about those adaptations.
Okay.
That took Double Dragons.
Yeah.
Beyond video games.
Okay.
The cartoon series.
Yeah.
The live-action movie.
Yes.
Those were some bold moves.
They were, and the results were, well, let's say mixed.
Yeah.
But it's still important to recognize the ambition behind those projects.
Yeah.
They were trying to expand the Double Dragon universe to reach, a wider audience,
Right.
explore new possibilities for storytelling.
Yeah, it was a time when video game adaptations were just starting to gain some traction.
Yeah.
And while we might look back at some of those early attempts and laugh a little,
Yeah.
it's important to remember they were pioneers in a way.
Totally.
Paving the way for the more sophisticated adaptations that we see today.
Absolutely. They were testing the waters, figuring out what worked, what didn't.
Right.
And even though not all of those experiments were successful,
Right.
they did provide valuable lessons
Yeah.
for future filmmakers and storytellers.
So let's dive into those adaptations a bit more.
Okay.
The cartoon series, for example.
Yeah.
They took some interesting liberties
They did, yeah.
with the source material.
Yeah, they introduced new characters, expanded on the backstory, and they even added a mystical element.
Oh yeah, to
Yeah.
the whole Double Dragon mythos.
Yeah.
The Double Dragon itself.
Yeah.
That mystical force that gave Billy and Jimmy
Right.
their martial arts powers. I mean, that's a far cry from the
Yeah.
gritty street fighting
Right.
of the games, But it added a whole new layer to the story.
It did, and it's interesting to think about why they made that choice. Maybe they felt they had to inject something more fantastical to appeal to a younger audience.
Yeah.
Or maybe they saw it as an opportunity to to explore like a different facet of the Double Dragon world.
It definitely made the cartoon feel distinct from the games.
It did.
It wasn't like a rehash of the same story.
Right.
It was its own, like, unique interpretation.
Absolutely. And while some fans, might have preferred like a more faithful adaptation, you can't deny that the cartoon had its own charm.
It did.
Its own appeal.
And let's not forget about the villains.
Oh, yeah.
The Shadow Master.
Oh, yeah.
Was a pretty memorable antagonist.
He was a great addition.
Yeah, he had this creepy, almost supernatural vibe.
Yeah.
Which was, completely different from the more grounded bad guys in the game.
Yeah, he was a great addition, and his presence added this layer of intrigue and mystery to the series.
Yeah.
You never really knew what he was up to or what his ultimate goals were. He was like a puppet master, pulling the strings from the shadows.
It's funny how, like, some of those seemingly small changes can have such a big impact on the overall tone and feel of a story.
It's true. It's a good reminder that adaptation isn't just about recreating something beat for beat.
Right.
It's about, finding the essence of the source material and then translating that into a new medium in the way that feels fresh and engaging.
And speaking of fresh and engaging, let's talk about that live action Double Dragon movie.
Oh, yeah.
Now that was a wild ride.
That movie, oh boy.
Yeah.
Definitely a product of its time.
It was
early 90s were a weird time for video game adaptations.
It was a time of experimentation, that's for sure.
Yeah. It was
and while Double Dragon the movie might not have been a critical darling or anything.
Yeah.
It definitely had its moments.
It did. It had a certain cheesy charm that's hard to resist.
Like, come on, who doesn't love a good bad movie every now and then?
I know, right? I get it.
It's like a guilty pleasure.
Totally. But even beyond the unintentional humor,
I
think the Double Dragon movie is interesting from a historical perspective.
Okay.
It shows us how far we've come. In terms of video game adaptation.
It's like a benchmark, right?
Yeah.
A reminder of what not to do.
Yeah.
And while we might chuckle at its, sword two wings today, you got to give it credit for trying something different.
Yeah.
Pushing those boundaries of what a video game movie could be.
Absolutely. And even though it, maybe it wasn't a masterpiece, it still contributed to the evolution of the genre, paved the way for the more successful adaptations that we see today.
So we've explored the groundbreaking gameplay, the iconic characters, the ambitious adaptations.
Yeah.
But what about Double Dragon's legacy?
Right.
What is it about this franchise that still resonates with fans decades after its debut? It's amazing how Double Dragon just captured the spirit of a whole era. It wasn't just a game; it was like a cultural touchstone.
It really was, and I think a big part of why it's still so popular is its simplicity, right? That the basic idea is so easy to understand.
Yeah. Two
brothers fighting their way through, tons of enemies to rescue someone they love. It's a classic story. It's timeless. That kind of thing resonates with everyone.
It's like the hero's journey, but boiled down to its purest form.
Exactly.
No crazy plot twists, no moral gray areas, just pure action.
Yeah, and that's part of what makes it so appealing, right? It's a game you can just pick up and play, even if you've never seen it before.
Right.
You don't need to spend hours on tutorials or memorizing like complicated combos. You jump in and you start brawling.
And those brawls were so satisfying, right? Like the impact of every punch, the crunch of a well-timed kick. It was visceral. It was intense. It was just plain fun.
Oh, absolutely. The developers really nailed the feeling of hand-to-hand combat.
They did.
You felt like you were really connecting with those punches and kicks.
Oh, yeah.
And the sound design was a big part of that, too.
Oh, for sure. The sound effects were like top-notch. The thuds, the grunts, the screams of the enemies as you beat them.
Yeah.
It all added to that immersive experience.
And let's not forget about the music, those synth-heavy tracks. So catchy, so energetic.
Oh, I know.
They really captured the whole mood and the tone of the game. Like they pump you up and they keep you right there in the action.
I still catch myself like humming the Double Dragon theme song. You know, every now and then, it's one of those melodies that just gets stuck in your head.
It's a classic, and it really shows you the power of a great soundtrack.
Absolutely.
Music can take a game from like good to great, and Double Dragon is a perfect example of that.
So we've got the simple but engaging story, the satisfying combat, the memorable sound design. But there's something else. There's something else there, you know, like something you can't quite put your finger on that makes Double Dragon really special.
I think what you're talking about is the style.
Yes, exactly. Double Dragon had this undeniable cool factor.
Yes.
From the character designs to those gritty urban environments. It just oozed style, oozed attitude.
It did. And that style came from a lot of different places, you know, classic martial arts films, 80s action movies. It was this blend of pop culture references that all came together to create something unique, something that you remember.
And you see those influences in everything. The characters' clothes, their hairstyles, the way they move, the way they fight. There was like a swagger, you know,
Right.
like a confidence in everything they did.
It's like they knew they were the coolest guys in the room, you know? And honestly, who didn't want to be Booley and Jimmy Lee back in the day?
I know I did.
Yeah, they were the ultimate badasses, fighting for justice, saving the day. Like they were everything a kid in the 80s wanted to be.
And that's the magic of Double Dragon, right? It tapped into those desires we have for adventure, for excitement, for heroism.
Right.
It gave us a chance to like step into the shoes of these larger than life characters and experience this world of action and intrigue.
It was a power fantasy, but it was also about brotherhood, about loyalty, about fighting for what's right, even when it seems impossible.
And that message, that's something that still connects with people today. I mean, it doesn't matter how much the gaming world changes. There's always going to be a place for stories about courage, about determination, about the bonds of family.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Double Dragon, I think it's safe to say that this is more than just a bunch of video games.
Right.
It's a cultural phenomenon. It's proof that creativity, innovation, and a whole lot of 80s flair can really make something special.
It reminds us that great ideas can outlast time and technology. You know, they can inspire generations of gamers and storytellers. And who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe someday we'll see a new Double Dragon game that captures the magic of the original, but also pushes the genre forward in some exciting new ways.
Now, that would be amazing.
It would.
But until then, we'll just have to keep those memories alive, you know? Replay those classic games and relive the glory days of beat-em-up action.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.